Hello and good evening everyone. Today we will talk about reproduction in plant. In my previous video, we have already seen the asexual type of reproduction in plant. In this video, we will talk about the sexual reproduction in plants. When you look around in nature, you will see that every living organism tends to reproduce young ones like them. For example, a mango plant produces mango fruits, and the seeds of these fruits germinates and develop into a new mango plant. And similarly, every living organism also gives rise to the young ones of their own kind. Although there are certain organisms that cannot reproduce due to some genetic reasons or defects in their organization. There are main two types of reproductions: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Let's have a small recap. Asexual type of reproduction is the reproduction where an organism gives rise to new individual asexually without formation of any gametes. Only one parent is involved in this type of reproduction. So a single organism divides into two or more number of cells, and all the newly produced young ones show genetic similarity and may be called as clones of each other. On the other hand, sexual reproduction involves formation and fusion of gametes. The two types of cells that we call gametes are involved in this reproduction. Both these gametes produced by the two different individuals or sometimes by a single individual. So let us jump into the sexual reproduction in plant. Flowering is the indication of maturity and sexual ability of the plants. Basically, flowers are the modified shoot and highly reduced structures, especially meant for the production of gametes. There are two types of flowers: unisexual flowers and bisexual flowers. Unisexual flowers are the flowers that has only one type of sexual organ. So there will be either male flowers or female flowers. But in case of bisexual flowers, there will be presence of both of the type of reproductive organs. In typical flower, you will find various structures which can be divided into two types as accessory whorl and essential whorls. The accessory whorls are thalamus, sepal and petals, while the essential whorls are androecium and gynoecium. The accessory whorls are responsible for overall development and protection of the flower, whereas the essential flowers are actually responsible for the development of gametes and fertilization. Essential floral whorls include androecium, that is male reproductive organ, and gynoecium, that is female reproductive organ. Now let us talk about androecium in detail. Androecium or male reproductive floral whorl is responsible for the development of pollen grains. Its individual member is called as stamen. Stamen composed of three parts: anther, connective and filament. Anther is a fertile part, while connective and filaments are non-fertile parts. The process of pollen grain formation or microsporogenesis takes place inside the anther. That's why anther is also known as microsporangium. When you look at the anther, you will see anther has two main compartments which are further divided into four chambers. That's why anther is called as dithecous and tetralocular. The externalmost layer of the anther is called as epidermis, is made up of single layer of cuboidal cells. The second layer is called as endothecium, followed by three small layers called as middle layers. Epidermis and endothecium are found covering all the four chambers, whereas middle layers are surrounding each chamber. Tapetum is the innermost layer made up of triangular cells which provide nutrition to the developing pollen grains. The microsporangiums are filled with sporogenous tissue which is diploid in nature. On the maturation, this diploid tissue undergo meiosis so as to produce haploid pollen grains. On the completion of the maturation of pollen grains, due to the hygroscopic nature of epidermis and endothecium, it loses water and gets shrink on the lateral side. These sites are known as sites of dehiscence. On maturation, the pollen grains become lightweight. They get released outside the microsporangia. The number of pollen grains which are present inside the microsporangia are now ready to pollinate. At the time of pollination, most of the pollen grains are found in two-celled stage. One cell is called a generative cell and other cell is called as tube cell. Generative cell is a small cell but has a large nucleus, whereas tube cell is larger cell and has a small nucleus. Later on, the generative cell nucleus divides mitotically to produce two nuclei which are haploid in nature, whereas the nucleus of tube cell is also haploid. These pollen grains are carried away from anthers and may reach the stigma of female flower. On the other hand, gynoecium is the female floral whorl which is composed of stigma, style tube and ovary. Stigma is called as pistil, which acts as a receptacle for the pollen grains, while style is the site for the growth of the pollen tube. Ovary contain one or more ovules, which is responsible for Megasporogenesis or the development of female egg cell. Typically, ovule is inverted structure with a body and stalk. Its superior end is called as chalaza, while inferior end is micropyle. It has a central mass called as nucellus, which is diploid in nature and surrounded by number of layers called as integuments. The cells of nucellus gives rise to the megaspore mother cell, which later on become embryo sac. The mature embryo sac is present towards the micropylar end. Embryo sac is 7-celled 8-nucleate structure. After the pollination, pollen grains get deposited on the stigma, where they absorb water and get swollen. Due to increase in the hydrostatic pressure, there will be formation of a pollen tube which comes out of a germ pore and start to grow towards the ovule. Usually pollen tube enters the micropyle, where it comes in contact with the synergid and utilize its tube nucleus, mixing the cytoplasm of embryo sac and the pollen tube. Tube cell followed by two male gametes. The first male gamete come and fuse with egg cell, which results into formation of zygote and thereby embryo. Whereas the second male gamete get fused with the polar nuclei, which results into the second fertilization so as to produce endosperm, which is the nutritive tissue for the development of zygote. This is referred to as the double fertilization, which is unique to the angiosperms. Later on, zygote develops into seed, whereas ovary develops into fruit. This is the process of sexual reproduction and formation of fruits in the flowering plants. Hope now you have understood the process of reproduction in plants. Kindly like, share and press the bell icon.